Hello folks, welcome to the 2019 New Year and 2010 New Decade Celebration, Part 2. In Part 1, we left off finishing 2012 with a visit to Marion, Ohio. Unfortunately, there were 2 trips I forgot to add in there. Knowing that there wasn't any room left in that video, I decided to put those 2 trips at the beginning of this video. The date is now August 5th, 2012, and we are still in Marion, Ohio. Don't worry, we won't stay here for long.
So fast we couldn't even run out.
I have already discussed about the Marion Union Station Association, but there is another group that's on the property here, the Marion Model Railroad Club. Located inside one of the buildings next to the station, the club houses a huge model railroad layout. The theme of the railroad is of the fictional Ohio and Western Railroad, sort of based off the Norfolk and Western Railroad. Even though this line is based off of a fictional railroad, you can still see a variety of trains running on the layout, such as this Norfolk Southern coal train. If you wish to visit the Marion Model Railroad Club, they're open every Sunday from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. throughout the year. I'll leave a link for their website down in the description box below so you can check them out. After seeing the coal drag climb this hill, we then go outside where we see a southbound CSX freight train on the Columbus subdivision.
What? Why is it better? Because I think I hear it moving. That's a good shot. Yes.
As this train continues to roll on by, note the former Illinois Central Gulf flat car coming by with aluminum blocks on it. After the freight train passed, another CSX freight train came on by, this time on the Mount Victory subdivision, heading eastbound.
Here it comes, Bear.
You ready, brother? What made this train so interesting was the fact that there were loaded coal cars at the front and back of this train, but there were none in the middle. After the odd train passed, Norfolk Southern came into the picture. We first see a small grain train led by a former Norfolk and Western engine heading southbound.
What's so funny? I'm laughing. Okay. Wow, look at this, boy.
As soon as this grain train clears the crossing, an NS coal train passes by with a special unit on the point.
Here comes the other one. It's coming right behind it. Come on.
Don't worry, I got it. Unless it's too late to move. It does have that.
At the head of this train is NS 1040 and Jersey Central Line's 1071. The trailing locomotive with the fallen flag on it is a heritage unit. Heritage units are locomotives that are painted to pay homage to a predecessor railroad, in this case, the Central Railroad of New Jersey. From March 15th to June 27th of 2012, Norfolk Southern rolled out its new heritage fleet on their railroad. From July 1st to July 3rd, all 20 of NS's heritage locomotives were on display at the North Carolina Transportation Museum in Spencer, North Carolina, to help celebrate Norfolk Southern's 30th birthday. The first one I ever saw, along with my brother, was Nickel Plate Road 8100. It was seen in the last part with Nickel Plate Road 765 as it ran through here. After the coal train passed by, we now move on to another great hotspot in Ohio. The date is now September 30th, 2012, and we are in the small town of Greenwich, Ohio. Greenwich is where CSX's Greenwich subdivision crosses over the Newcastle and Willard Terminal subdivisions. This is also where the Wheeling and Lake Erie Railroad connects with CSX for trackage rights to New London, Ohio, just northeast of here. The Autorack train you're seeing is headed westbound, on the Newcastle sub crossing over to the Willard subdivision. The reason why we're here is because of the Hotspots Guidebook. It's stated in the book that Greenwich is a very busy railroad town, seeing up to 75 to 80 trains every 24 hours through here. And with it written like that in the book, I knew we had to go check it out. We had only just got into town when this train pulled out. We are at the Neffin Street Railroad crossing on the northeast side of town. As soon as the end of this train came on by us, CSX then sent an eastbound intermodal train right on by us.
Another one coming?
Mm-hmm.
Hey.
The tracks that this train is on is the former Baltimore and Ohio Railroad's Chicago line. The train you're seeing here is headed towards Pittsburgh, while the Autorack train that just came moments ago is heading towards Fostoria and ultimately Chicago. The Greenwich subdivision is the former New York Central main line. A train headed eastbound on that line would end up in Cleveland and ultimately New York State, while a train heading westbound would end up in Marion, then Indianapolis, and ultimately St. Louis. The Wheeling and Lake Erie line that connects here is the former Akron, Canton, and Youngstown Railroad. Their line used to parallel the old NYC to New London, but it was later abandoned in favor of using trackage rights to get there. Today, the old AC&Y line from here to New London is now a bike trail. At the time of our visit, CSX crews were moving ties around, probably in preparation for some sort of tie replacement project on one of the lines.
Truck trailers.
Oh yeah, intermodal thing, huh?
Yeah.
Two tones already, not bad. Yeah.
I see it.
A little after this intermodal train came on by, another intermodal train, this time heading westbound, came on through.
Babe, it's alright. It's alright, brother.
As the end of this intermodal train comes closer, another CSX Autorack train comes off the Greenwich subdivision and onto the Newcastle subdivision, heading eastbound.
I think there's another train. It's... Dang it. He never did. Yep.
What's this, our fourth train in like 10 minutes?
More like 5 seconds. We will be right Stand strong. Hey, brother, look, Burlington Northern. I got it on there.
You still got the sign?
Unfortunately, we are going to have to leave now and continue on our time journey. We finally arrive in 2013. On March 22nd, we are now in Circleville, Ohio, where we see a southbound coal train on NS going through town with 2 very special locomotives at the front. Besides the last 4 we saw, the others include Monongahela Railway 8025, Conrail 8098, Southern Railway 8099, Central of Georgia 8101, Pennsylvania Railroad 8102, Norfolk and Western 8103, Lehigh Valley 8104, Interstate Railroad 8105, Original Norfolk Southern 8114, Savannah and Atlanta 1065, New York Central 1066, Erie Railway 1068, Virginian Railroad 1069, Illinois Terminal 1072, Penn Central 1073, and Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 1074. The 80 series locomotives are General Electric ES44ACs, while the 10 series are EMD SD70 ACEs. Besides Norfolk Southern, Amtrak, Canadian Pacific, the Central Maine and Quebec Railway, Iowa Interstate, Iowa Northern, Metra, NJ Transit, and Union Pacific also have heritage fleets, but NS has the largest amount of them on their roster.
I can't see the back end.
The reason why we are here in Circleville was because my dad, brother, and I were on a road trip to West Virginia and Kentucky with the goal of visiting more hotspots, this time out of state.
Fast car.
We now go to the next day, where we find ourselves in Canova, West Virginia. Canova is a small town located at the very point where the Ohio River and the Big Sandy River converges. This is also where both NS and CSX cross into and out of West Virginia. As you can see, this NS Autorack train is crossing over the Ohio River and into West Virginia.
Poor puppies. First train of the day, Dad.
This is what we wanted too. Is that where you want to be?
The bridge this train is on was first built in 1892 as a single-track line by the Norfolk and Western Railroad. In 1913, the bridge was rebuilt to a double-track span as we see it today. Canova sees around 40 to 60 trains roll through here, with NS showing slightly more than CSX. Amtrak also runs through here with the Cardinal on CSX's trackage. NS's line across the bridge is the Canova district. Going north on this line will take you to Columbus, Marion, and ultimately Bellevue, while going south will take you to Roanoke and ultimately Norfolk, Virginia. After the NS train crossed the bridge, CSX then sent a westbound coal train past us.
Coach.
The line this train is on is CSX's Canal Subdivision. This train will cross the Big Sandy River and into Kentucky, where it will ultimately reach Cincinnati, Ohio. Going the opposite direction will take you to Huntington, down the New River Gorge, towards Lexington, Richmond, and ultimately Newport News, Virginia. Across the Big Sandy River in Kentucky is CSX's Big Sandy Sub, where it connects with the Canal Sub at Big Sandy Junction in Catlettsburg, Kentucky. Going south on that line will take you down into coal country towards the old Clinchfield Railroad. All the tracks CSX owns is the former Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, while the lines owned by NS are the old Norfolk and Western Railroad. After our little visit to Canova was over, we then got back on the road and eventually ended up in Burnside, Kentucky. Burnside, Kentucky is home to the famous Burnside Bridge, which crosses over the Cumberland River. The Burnside Bridge, also known as the Cumberland River Bridge, is on Norfolk Southern's famous Rat Hole line. More accurately, the line crossing the river is NS's C&O and TP 2nd District. Burnside is a crew change point for NS, and all trains stop here at the NS depot in town. Going north on this line will take you to Cincinnati, Ohio, while going south on this line will take you to Chattanooga, Tennessee. An interesting fact about this line is that the property in which the line is on is owned by the City of Cincinnati. The City of Cincinnati runs the Cincinnati Southern Railway, which in turn leases the right-of-way to Norfolk Southern. This agreement dates back all the way to 1881, when the city chose the Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific Railroad to operate the line. As time marched on, the agreement got transferred to the Southern Railway, and then today's successor, Norfolk Southern. In 2026, the lease on the line will expire, but it is expected that Norfolk Southern will renew the lease for another 25 years. Soon the NS train crossing the bridge came to a stop to make the crew change. A little later, we saw another NS intermodal train crossing the bridge.
See, if he took that risk, he wouldn't jeopardize it. Guys, that's a former Union Pacific, but owned by Norfolk.
The bridge itself was built in 1950 as part of a line relocation project by the Southern Railway. The line used to cross the Cumberland River at a much lower level, but when the U.S. government built Wolf Creek Dam, the Southern was forced to relocate their line because the water level would now have been just where the height of the old bridge was. The only thing left from the old line is the abandoned Tunnel Number 4, which you can still see by taking a boat out onto Lake Cumberland. Sometimes, if the water level is low enough, you can still see the pillars from the old Burnside Bridge. After the train came to a stop, we then relocated more closer to the tracks, to where we caught it leaving Burnside. Trust me when I say that Burnside and Canova are great places to watch trains. If you wish to see the rest of this trip, you can go watch my video, Rails to the South, Volume 1, which covers the entire trip. I'll leave a link down in the description box below for that video so you can check it out for yourself. We now return back to Columbus, Ohio on March 30th. We are now at the High Street Overpass, where we see a southbound CSX coal train as it enters Parsons Yard.
Hey, was that a gate open? No way.
Just southeast of the High Street Bridge is the former Buckeye Steel Casting Company. Buckeye Steel was built in 1881 as the Murdy Hayden Foundry, which started producing iron castings for farmers. The company struggled until 1891, when it found more success in producing knuckle couplers. Eventually, in the late 1890s, the company changed its name to Buckeye Steel Casting. The Buckeye Company would also become known for making Buckeye trucks, a type of bogie that went underneath tenders and other cars on the railroad scene. Today, some mainline steam excursion stars use Buckeye trucks on their tenders, such as Nickel Plate Road 765, Southern Pacific 4449, and most recently, Chesapeake and Ohio 2716, just getting some in 2019. In 1901, Buckeye Steel hired a man by the name of Samuel Prescott Bush to become their general manager. S.P. Bush started out on the Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Chicago, and St. Louis Railway as an apprentice mechanic. By the time he left the railroad, he had become superintendent of motive power. He also worked for the Milwaukee Road for a brief time before coming to the Buckeye Steel Company. Then in 1908, Bush took over as president of the company, and he held on to that position until 1928. S.P. Bush was the grandfather to George H.W. Bush, and was also the great-grandfather of George W. Bush. As we all know, both George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush would later become U.S. presidents.
I think they did.
S.P. Bush would pass away at the age of 81 on February 8, 1948.
NTCS.
Getting back to Buckeye Steel, in 1968, Buckeye Industrial Inc. was formed to manage the company, and in 1980, it was acquired in a merger with Worthington Industries. Worthington Industries sold off Buckeye Steel in 1999, but in 2002, Buckeye Steel went bankrupt. As of the time of this video, Buckeye Steel had been reopened as Columbus Steel Casting, but sadly in 2016, the new company went bankrupt. In 2018, the whole complex was demolished. Nothing remains of the once mighty steel plant.
4 more after that one.
No, wait, that's the last one. I knew that was it.
After the coal train passed, we then headed into downtown. We now find ourselves at North Bank Park. Here, the Scioto River makes a backwards S as it makes its way through downtown. This place is also an excellent spot to watch trains going through downtown. At the top of this backwards S, NS's Dayton District and CSX's Columbus subdivisions both cross the river here to get to LM Cabin. We now see a CSX southbound coal train as it crosses the Scioto River on the impressive bridge. This bridge the train is using is called the Scioto River Bridge. Of course, this isn't the only bridge in the vicinity. Just east of the bridge is NS's Upper Sandusky River Bridge, which carries the Dayton District across the river. In the middle of the backwards S, just south of us, is where both NS's Western Branch and CSX's Columbus Sub both cross the river on the jointly owned Lower Scioto River Twin Bridge.
More than half the train was gone.
Yeah, I think so.
Here's down. That's where it might be. 75 to 100 cars.
After our visit back to Columbus, we then took another trip, this time to Pennsylvania, to visit Norfolk Southern's famous Pennsylvania Main Line. The date is now May 27th, and we are at the Horseshoe Curve, the most famous part of the old Pennsy Main Line. Here we see Amtrak's Pennsylvanian headed eastbound with an interesting coach at the rear.
That's neat.
Surely some Pennsy man was rolling in his grave at this. Anyway, as you can see, we weren't the only people there at the Horseshoe Curve today. Don't worry, the reason will show itself a little later, but first, we'll see 3 more NS trains climbing and going down the hill. We first see a pair of helper locomotives as they head westbound up the hill. All the helpers on this line are SD40Es. They were former SD50s, but in 2008, Norfolk Southern rebuilt all the SD50s into SD40Es to extend their service life on the railroad. We then see a westbound empty piggyback train as it growls up the hill. The line the Horseshoe Curve is on is Norfolk Southern's Pittsburgh line. If you follow this train west, it will take you to the line's namesake city, while following the train the opposite direction will take you to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and ultimately New York, New York. The line sees 40 to 50 trains per day and sees all types of freight trains come through here, along with Amtrak's Pennsylvanian, which we saw earlier. Located inside the curve is the Horseshoe Curve National Historic Landmark Park, which we are currently at. The park is managed by the Railroaders Memorial Museum down in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Down below at road level, they run a souvenir and gift shop. If you wish to get inside the park, you do have to pay a fee to get in. Once in the park, you can either take the stairway up to the park or take the funicular railway up to the park. The park is open from early April to late November on Friday and Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Sundays from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. As the train continues to roll on through, another NS intermodal train came right on through, heading eastbound.
Here's that intermodal.
The curve itself is 2,375 feet long and 1,300 feet in diameter. The line was opened on February 15, 1854, and was the idea of John Edgar Thompson, the chief engineer for the Pennsylvania Railroad at the time. The curve stayed under Pennsy control until 1968, when the railroad became part of the Penn Central. After that disaster of a railroad, it then became part of Conrail in 1976. It stayed as Conrail until the split up of 1999, when Norfolk Southern and CSX split up the company, and in the process, the Pittsburgh line became under control of NS. There were two reasons why we did this trip. The first reason was to see the hotspots of Crescent, Gallitzin, Altoona, and the Horseshoe Curve. And the second reason was now charging up the hill. Nickel Plate Road 765, as part of Norfolk Southern's 21st Century Steam program, was pulling a public excursion train from Lewistown to Gallitzin, Pennsylvania, and return. Just like last year, Nickel Plate Road 765 and Southern Railway 630 were pulling excursions for Norfolk Southern. Even though this was our first time seeing steam around the curve, this was 765's second time, as last year it was the first steam engine to run around the curve since 1977. But since this trip, there hasn't been any other active steam engines to go around the curve. A little bit later, we saw 765 again as it was pulling its train down the hill, bound for Altoona, Pennsylvania. Behind 765 was Pennsylvania Railroad 8102 and Conrail 8098, two more NS heritage units. Not only were they there for insurance reasons, but they were also there to celebrate the history of this line. Trust me when I say this place is a great place to see trains. It's a rail fan's paradise. If you wish to come visit the curve, it's located at 2400 Veterans Memorial Highway, Altoona, Pennsylvania. You can also visit their website at https://www.railroadcity.com/visit/world-famous-horseshoe-curve/ for more information. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out. Also, if you wish to see more of this trip, I covered the entire trip in Pennsylvania Railroading Volume 1 on the Pennsylvania Railroad. I'll also leave a link for the video down in the description box below so you guys can go check that out as well. After our trip to PA, we then return to Ohio. We first go to Wapakoneta, Ohio on June 27th. We are at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum just off of Interstate 75. The Armstrong Air and Space Museum is a museum dedicated to the life of Neil A. Armstrong and space exploration. Wapakoneta was the childhood home of Neil Armstrong, the man who first walked on the moon on July 20th, 1969. After he made history, Governor of Ohio at the time, James Rhodes, proposed the plan to build this museum to honor Armstrong. The museum was also built to honor, and I quote, all the Ohioans who attempted to defy gravity. Then on July 20th, 1972, 3 years after the Apollo 11 mission, the museum was opened to much fanfare. Even Neil Armstrong was there to help open the museum. If you wish to visit the museum, they are located at 500 Apollo Drive, Wapakoneta, Ohio. From October to March, they are opened on Tuesdays through Saturdays from 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and on Sundays from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. They are also open from April to September, Monday through Saturday from 9:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. and on Sundays from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can also visit their website at https://armstrongmuseum.org for more information there. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out. We then moved on to Rushville, Ohio, where we saw a westbound CSX coal train going down the Mount Victory subdivision. After our visit to the Armstrong Air and Space Museum in Wapakoneta, I wanted to go visit Ridgeway and see if we can catch a few trains there. On our way there, we just so happened to drive through Rushville, where we saw this CSX train coming towards the crossing, so we pulled over to catch it. We now go to Ridgeway, Ohio. Ridgeway is where CSX's Mount Victory subdivision crosses over the Scotland Secondary subdivision. Here we saw a CSX northbound coal train as it went from the secondary to the Mount Victory sub, turning into a westbound coal train.
Taking the cross track. Brought the tripod.
If you go south on the secondary, you'll end up in Columbus, while going north will take you to Toledo, Ohio. Going east on the Mount Victory sub will take you to Marion, Greenwich, Cleveland, and ultimately New York State. Going west on the line will take you to Indianapolis and St. Louis. The reason why I wanted to come here was because of Conrail Hotspots West. Conrail Hotspots West is a Pentrax production that covers prominent train watching spots on the western half of the Conrail system. You can tell when this Pentrax video was made. Anyway, in the video, they showed Ridgeway as a hotspot, and I thought I wanted to go check it out. If you're a fan of Conrail and want to relive the days of when waves of light blue locomotives rumbled down the rails, I highly recommend getting this documentary. I also recommend getting Conrail Hotspots East as a companion documentary. It does pretty much the exact same thing, except covering the eastern half of the Conrail system. And yes, that video does include the Horseshoe Curve, back when Conrail used to run it. This isn't a paid advertisement. Heck, I don't even know if they know I exist. But trust me when I say Conrail Hotspots East and West are two documentaries I highly recommend getting if you don't already have them in your video library.
Alright, go, brother.
After our little trip to Wapakoneta, we then visited Berea, Ohio, just 3 days later, on June 30th. Wow, it just occurred to me on just how many hotspots are in northern Ohio. Well, anyway, Berea is a junction where Norfolk Southern's famed Chicago line passes CSX's main lines. This is also where CSX's Greenwich sub ends and meets up with the Cleveland Short Line subdivision, although trains on CSX don't change crews here. The first train we see here is a westbound NS freight as it passes the famed Berea Tower. Due to the length of the video again, I can't show you all the trains we saw here because we'd be here all day and it would take up most of the video. Anyway, the next train we saw here was an eastbound NS ethanol train with 2 CSX locomotives trailing.
What?
Berea is a very busy junction with 100 to 110 trains passing through here in a 24-hour period. Besides NS and CSX, Amtrak's Lake Shore Limited and Capital Limited passenger trains pass by on NS, but only at night. The Wheeling and Lake Erie Railway also comes through here using trackage rights on both NS and CSX, but they only operate here when they need to. From Wellington, Ohio to here, the Wheeling and Lake Erie Railway runs on CSX's Greenwich subdivision. Then their trains use the connection tracks here to get over to NS's Chicago line to continue on into Cleveland. Starting with CSX, going down the Greenwich sub will take you to Greenwich, Marion, Ridgeway, Indianapolis, and ultimately St. Louis. The Cleveland Short Line sub runs around the city where it ends in Collinwood on the east side of Cleveland. From a yard in Collinwood, trains can continue on CSX into New York State. On Norfolk Southern Chicago line, going west on the line will take you to Toledo, South Bend, and ultimately Chicago. Going east, the Chicago line ends in downtown Cleveland. Later on in the day, it started to rain, and a CSX westbound intermodal train came on by. Both the lines here, back in the heyday of railroading, were owned by the New York Central. As you can probably guess, the history was pretty much summed up as Penn Central, Conrail, and today's CSX and Norfolk Southern. If you get hungry while watching the trains here, you can go over to the Berea Depot Bar and Restaurant, housed in the former New York Central Berea Union Station. The restaurant serves great food, and the best part about it is that you don't even have to leave the action, because the trains run right by the restaurant. The restaurant's address is 30 Depot Street, Berea, Ohio. Their normal hours are from Monday through Thursday from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., Friday, Saturday from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., and Sunday from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. A little later, after this intermodal train came by, we then caught a rather short intermodal train heading eastbound on CSX.
Watch out.
Yep.
Right there? Is that good?
Trust me when I say this, if you're ever in Cleveland and want to see as many trains as possible, come and visit Berea. It's a great hotspot if you haven't been convinced already. Anyway, for our last train, we see an NS eastbound intermodal train as it comes down the Chicago line. After watching the mainline action here, we then ended up in Cleveland. But for the sake of the video, we'll have to come back to Cleveland in part 3. After our visit to Berea, we then visited Toledo at a place known as Vickers on July 7th. When we first got there, the first train we saw there was a small CSX autorack train headed north. After seeing the small train, we then drove south of Vickers, where we saw a southbound Canadian National Freight as it entered into CSX's Walbridge Yard.
Nope.
Am I in the top?
Vickers is the junction where Norfolk Southern Chicago line crosses CSX's Toledo Terminal subdivision. This junction can see up to 120 trains per day through here. Besides CSX and NS, Canadian National trains use CSX's Toledo Terminal to get into Walbridge Yard in order to interchange trains with them. Amtrak's Lakeshore Limited and Capital Limited passenger trains also run through here on NS, but normally at night. The Toledo Terminal subdivision is a small north-south line that connects CSX's Toledo sub, Toledo branch sub, and Columbus subs with their other lines in Michigan. The Chicago line is an east-west line. Going west on that line will take you to South Bend and ultimately Chicago. Going east will take you to Berea and ultimately Cleveland. After the CN train got into the yard, we then caught a westbound NS train on the Chicago line. Just like Berea, I can't show you all the trains we saw here because we'd be pretty much here forever. At the time of our visit, the former New York Central Signal Bridge was still in use here on NS, and the Juilliard and Welsh Road crossings were still in place. But times were changing, as new overpasses were being constructed at the time to replace the crossings and carry the roads over the railroad tracks. Much later in the day, we then saw an eastbound NS intermodal train heading down the Chicago line underneath the classic New York Central Signal Bridge.
Car horn.
After our little trip to Vickers, we then started making our way home, but not before returning back to Fostoria. When we got to Fostoria, we stopped by the former B&O passenger station on the west side of town, where we caught a westbound CSX intermodal train as it ran by the station. The B&O passenger station here used to see plenty of B&O passenger trains, such as the Capital Limited, the Columbian, the Ambassador, and the Shenandoah. By 1971, passenger business was transferred over to Amtrak. Once Amtrak took over, most of the passenger trains on this line were discontinued, with the exception of the Capital Limited, which was rerouted off the B&O main line west of Pittsburgh. Its new routing took it over the old Pennsylvania main line to Chicago. It wasn't until November 10, 1990, that this line would see passenger train service again. By then, Amtrak was forced to relocate its passenger trains off the old Pennsy due to the fact that Conrail wanted to abandon the line. But instead of having the Capital Limited return, it was relocated to the old New York Central. The Broadway Limited, on the other hand, was put on the old B&O line to Chicago instead. By 1995, the Broadway was discontinued and replaced by the Three Rivers passenger train, and by 2005, the Three Rivers was discontinued and passenger service was eliminated on this line. The line hasn't seen any passenger trains ever since. And here's the station itself, which today is used by CSX. By this time, construction of the Iron Triangle Rail Park had just gotten underway back in June. We then see an eastbound ethanol train on NS being led by 2 Canadian Pacific locomotives. The park is owned and operated by the Fostoria Rail Preservation Society. Just like many other groups around the U.S., they aim to preserve railroad heritage. Besides the park, they also own the former Lake Erie and Western Depot that's in downtown. Although there are no tracks running by the depot anymore, you can rent it out for special events. If you wish to know more about this group or about the depot they run, you can go to their website at https://FostoriaIronTriangle.com for more information. The last train we caught here was a westbound CSX intermodal train as it passed by the old B&O depot. After our little trip to Toledo, we then returned back to the Lebanon, Mason, and Monroe Railroad on July 21st. The reason why we have returned to Lebanon was because of Lehigh Valley Coal Company number 126. 126 is an 060 saddle tank engine built in 1931 by the Vulcan Locomotive Works. The engine is owned by John and Brian Gremling, and they were the ones who restored this engine back in 2011. The Gremlings own 5 locomotives, 4 of which are tank engines. Besides 126, they also own Cornet Phosphate Company No. 7, which today is under restoration, Jeddo Highland Coal Company No. 85, which is in operation today, Lee Tidewater Cypress Company No. 18, the only tender engine which they own, which is also under restoration, and their flagship engine, Black Coal Company No. 75. The Gremlings take their tank engines, and soon-to-be tender engine, around the United States to various tourist railroads, usually ones that don't have steam engines of their own. Soon we got our tickets and it was time to board the train to ride 126 as it pulled its excursion train up and down the line. Let's skip ahead a little bit to when number 126 was actually pulling the train.
Pressure's 100. Pressure's at 146 inside.
As we pass Creech's Garden Center and Landscaping Company, LM&M 55 and freshly repainted Nickel Plate Road 901 are sitting on the siding here.
I can see it with an internal combustion engine. brother went back into his mom.
Okay then.
Alright.
Stay out here, huh?
Yeah. I just seen some. Brother has a tower like that on his layout.
What?
Brother has a tower like that on his layout.
Say it one more time.
What I said was brother has a tower like that on his layout.
Oh, okay.
After riding 126, we then chased it on its last run of the day. We first see the train at the Cincinnati Avenue Railroad crossing as it trundles by. After seeing the train here, we then saw it as it finished its run back at the LM&M depot in Lebanon. After seeing 126, we then move to Akron, Ohio on September 8th. We are at the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railway, and today, Nickel Plate Road 765 was pulling their annual Steam in the Valley trips. 2 volumes in, and I haven't even talked about the history of this engine yet. Well, let's change that. Nickel Plate Road 765 is an S2-284 Berkshire type steam locomotive. It was built in 1944 by the Lima Locomotive Works of Lima, Ohio. After about a 14-year career on the nickel plate, it was then retired, and in 1963, 765 was given to the city of Fort Wayne, Indiana. In 1972, the Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society was formed in order to restore 765 to operational condition, and on September 1st, 1979, 765 moved under her own power, beginning her second career as an excursion star. As you have seen throughout the documentary, 765, along with Southern Railway 630 from TVRM, have become part of Norfolk Southern's 21st Century Steam program. Besides the steam program, the Fort Wayne Group also participates in the annual Steam in the Valley trips, which are run by the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railway. The Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railway is a tourist railroad that runs from Rockside Station, just south of Cleveland, to Akron's Northside Station. They used to run all the way to Canton, Ohio, but in 2012, the service was halted due to the fact that the line no longer was suitable for passenger service. There are also other reasons for the shutdown, such as lack of ridership, equipment, and the lack of funds to bring the line up to passenger train service. There are hopes to reopen this section, but as of 2019, the service has yet to return. Even though we rode on this train during this trip, I'll just stick with the catches we made during this trip. We first go to Boston Mills. Boston Mills was the photo run-by location for the passengers. This is where they all got off and watched as 765 ran past them with the train in tow. Now we watch as 765 runs past the bystanders alongside the tracks. The tracks that the Cuyahoga Valley run on is owned and maintained by the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, a part of the National Park Service. They allow the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railway to operate trains on their line, including the Steam in the Valley trips. As soon as the train passed us, CVSR 6771 pulled the train back for yet another run-by. All the trains on the Cuyahoga Valley line operate with locomotives at both ends of their trains. If you wish to see more of this trip, you can go visit my video, John's Trains Adventures, Episode 23, Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad Steam 2013, which covered this entire trip. Again, I'll leave the link down in the description box below for you to check it out. As CVSR 6771 pulls back into the Boston Mills Depot, we'll have to move on now. Besides the Steam in the Valley trips, they also offer regular diesel passenger trains through the Cuyahoga Valley. So if you wish to ride the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railway, you can go to their website at https://www.cvsr.org for more information there. I'll leave a link down in the description box below so you can go check that out as well. After our trip to Akron, we then round out 2013 by returning to Columbus on November 29th. We're at the Watkins Road Bridge, which crosses over Norfolk Southern's Watkins Yard. As you just saw, there was a high hood locomotive in the consist, NS 5069. 5069 is an EMD GP38-2, built in 1973 for the Southern Railway. In 2018, 5069 was sold to the Buckingham Branch Railroad and renumbered to 15. After seeing the NS Coal Train, we then moved to the High Street Bridge, where we saw a CSX coal train led by CSX 7537, a standard cab.
I know.
That screwed up your little picture.
A little, oh well.
What kind of engine is that? In the back.
Oh, I think it's Dash 9. I don't
I
know.
think the same as when you said it.
Not really.
$7537 is a GE C40-8 built in 1989 for CSX. Sadly, in 2016, this engine, along with many others of its kind on the CSX system, were retired, and by 2017, 7537 was scrapped. After the CSX coal train came on by, we then moved to Valley Crossing. This was the first time we had ever visited Valley. Valley Crossing is where the Indiana and Ohio's Logan branch crosses over NS's Columbus district. CSX also has trackage rights on the Logan branch. The first train we ever saw here was a southbound NS freight. As this train rolls by, please note that there is a N&W boxcar amongst the big NS and Conrail boxcars. We now move on from 2013 to 2014, and the first place we go to in the new year is Fostoria, Ohio, on January 4th. By the beginning of 2014, the Iron Triangle Rail Park was pretty much finished, having a gazebo, platform, and plenty of parking for rail fans. The first train we saw here on this cold winter day was a southbound CSX freight being led by another standard cab. As the train continued to roll on by, F Tower then sent another CSX freight onto the Columbus subdivision heading northbound.
Hey, alright. Yeah, I see it.
That's the one Daddy saw down in Columbus.
Oh, cool.
I remember it. Are they coming up from Columbus?
No, they're coming up from what's it, Cleveland? Here in West Virginia is number 1.
What's up, brother?
On this day, my dad, brother, and I had paid a visit to both Fostoria and Deschler to see trains running through the snow.
See, you think that they would know?
Just before we left Fostoria, we decided to try and chase this Union Pacific train to Deschler. This train is the Produce Rail Express, also known as the Ice Cold Express, or the Produce Express for short. Anyway, this train carries all kinds of fruits and vegetables across the United States. It's operated by Union Pacific, CSX, and RailX. This train runs from Delano, California to Walla, Washington, over the Union Pacific till it reaches Chicago, where it switches over to CSX for the rest of the journey to Rotterdam, New York. This train is returning west for more produce. As soon as the train cleared my camera, we then started the chase. Although it was snowing everywhere, we were able to get to Deschler just before the Produce Express did.
We got it!
Deschler is a busy junction where CSX's Willard and Garrett subdivisions cross over the Toledo subdivision. The most notable features of Deschler are its rail park, the old Deschler Depot, and the old Deschler Interlocking Tower. But by far the most notable thing here in Deschler is the former Baltimore and Ohio target light signals that are still on the Toledo subdivision. Even as of 2019, the signals are still up there, and there is no sign of any replacements by any newer signals. Although all the lines here were former Baltimore and Ohio trackage, all the B&O signals on the Willard and Garrett subdivisions have been replaced by newer signals. The next train we saw here was a westbound intermodal train led by two BNSF locomotives.
There you go.
The junction sees up to 90 or 100 trains per day through here, mostly on the Willard and Garrett subdivisions. Although Amtrak's Broadway Limited and later Three Rivers passenger trains passed by here, the station was never a stop for them.
Guys, so where's the money? Alright guys, so where's the money? I bet we were 10 grades and we thought
I couldn't leave Deschler without seeing a train pass by the old B&O signals, and luckily, after the intermodal train passed here, a northbound CSX grain train came up. It was taking the connector tracks to go east on the Willard sub.
Right before the bells go off, this one shuts off first. It's only one. Well, we can do it.
You got the camera on the job?
Yep. Got the back.
The train had to come to a halt in order to get permission by dispatch to enter onto the Willard subdivision. Once the train did, they got back underway. In the distance, there was another intermodal train waiting to come through.
Train I just passed, you got somebody on board.
What are they going to do? And then what's he going to do?
Stop and look.
Well, when it stops, you just jump off and run.
Good point, and that makes it easier for you then to stop you. They'll just go, hey, look, it's that guy running over there.
I know, but then they ain't going to catch you. They can't just keep on.
After the grain train got underway, that train in the distance got underway as well.
Yeah, what are they going to do?
It was an eastbound CSX intermodal train.
That's really cool.
Now he's got a yellow or orange light.
Yeah. I'm guessing white means get ready to go.
I hope it's a Canadian Pacific.
If you wish to see the trains we caught here on this day, you can go check out John's Trains Adventures, Season 1, Episodes 2 and 3, which cover this trip. Fair warning though, since this is one of my earlier episodes, the audio quality is not as great as it is right now, and I had no idea how to even make, I had an idea how to make videos, but narration on the other hand, it was hit and miss, so fair warning on that one. And now we are at the end of part 2 of this extravaganza. Join us in part 3 as we continue to look back through the decade.